Most people believe peace comes after life finally slows down. But sometimes, peace only arrives when we stop abandoning ourselves in the rush. There was a man who learned this not through grand changes, but through a quiet, almost invisible shift. At first, he thought he was searching for relief from exhaustion. What he found instead was a forgotten door inside his own life. If you've ever felt strangely empty, despite doing everything you were supposed to do, you might recognize him. He wasn't broken, lazy, or ungrateful, just disconnected from the place where meaning grows. The world had taught him how to manage responsibilities, not how to listen inward. So he kept moving, hoping clarity would catch up eventually. It didn't, until something small and unexpected made him stop. What happened next wasn't dramatic or loud. No sudden enlightenment, no perfect transformation overnight. Just a simple discovery that serenity behaves more like a garden than a prize. It appears quietly when tended and fades quietly when ignored. And once he understood that, everything familiar began to feel slightly different. This story is for anyone who feels tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. For those who sense there must be a gentler way to live inside their own mind. You won't be asked to become someone new or chase impossible calm, only to consider that the peace you miss may still be waiting where you left it. Because caring for your inner world changes more than feelings. It changes how life meets you. He had become very good at tending to everything that could be seen. Emails answered, favors granted, problems patched before anyone noticed. Yet some evenings, when the noise finally thinned, a quiet hollowness lingered. It felt like returning to a house where the lights were on, but no one lived inside. He would sigh, unsure why rest never quite reached him. Outside, his days were crowded and efficient, almost admirable. Inside, though, it was as if a small garden had been left without water. Not dead, not ruined, just dry, waiting, a little forgotten. Sometimes he sensed it in odd moments, like when laughter felt borrowed, or when silence grew heavy instead of kind. He once tried to fix that feeling the way he fixed everything else. A new routine, a busier schedule, even louder distractions. But the emptiness didn't argue. It simply stayed, patient as dust. It seemed to whisper that serenity wasn't something you could chase down, more like something that stopped visiting when ignored too long. On certain mornings, he would pause at the window with his coffee. The world outside rushed forward, already asking things of him. Behind his ribs, though, there was that same unattended space, a quiet place that didn't need achievement, only a little noticing. He wondered, not for the first time, what might grow there if he did. And somewhere beneath that wondering was a softer question still. What if peace had been waiting, not missing all along? What if it belonged to whatever part of him he kept postponing? The thought unsettled him, though in a strangely hopeful way, because it hinted that something neglected might still be alive. Not long after that morning, he began to suspect the emptiness wasn't a flaw but a signal, like a room gently asking to be opened, aired, lived in again. He noticed how easily he cared for spaces outside himself, tidying, fixing, arranging. Yet his thoughts and feelings were left to stack up like unopened letters. It dawned on him that inner life might need tending to, quietly and on purpose. He started imagining his mind as that small, neglected garden behind an old house. Nothing dramatic, just soil waiting for a pair of patient hands. A place where weeds grew by default, but gentleness could grow by choice. The idea felt oddly relieving, as if nothing inside him was broken after all, only unattended, like a lamp that had simply run out of oil. So he tried something unfamiliar one evening, almost shyly. He sat on the edge of his bed and closed his eyes for a minute, not to achieve anything, just to notice what was there. Restlessness, a pinch of sadness, a flicker of warmth he hadn't felt in weeks. He breathed as if he were opening a window in a long closed room. To his surprise, nothing demanded perfection from him there. His thoughts softened when he stopped pushing them away. Even the harsh ones seemed to settle when treated like guests instead of intruders. He realized harmony wasn't about controlling the inner noise. It was about creating a place where the noise could finally rest. And as days passed, the outer world began to feel slightly different too. Not calmer exactly, but less sharp around the edges, as if the way he held things inside was tinting everything he saw. He wondered what else might change if he kept tending that unseen garden, because something in him had started leaning toward it, quietly, like a plant toward light. For years he had worn responsibility like a well-fitted coat, reliable, composed, the one people turned to when things wobbled. He told himself that was enough, that usefulness could replace joy. Still, there were moments when a joke passed over him like wind over stone. He would smile on cue, then feel oddly absent from his own life. Creativity used to visit him in small, playful ways. Doodles in the margins, half-finished melodies hummed while cooking. Now those impulses felt like letters addressed to someone who'd moved away. He couldn't remember when he'd stopped answering them, only that silence had slowly taken their place. Sometimes criticism cut deeper than it should have. A careless remark from a stranger could echo for hours. Rejection, even minor, landed like proof of something unnamed. He carried those moments quietly, stacking them where no one saw, until the weight made him wonder who he was beneath it all. Late one night, he caught his reflection in a dark window. For a second, he didn't recognize the tiredness in his own eyes. Not exhaustion from work, but from being distant from himself. It frightened him, that sense of being a stranger in familiar skin. As if he had misplaced the map to his own interior, he stood there longer than necessary, hand resting on the glass. Behind him, the room was orderly, functional, complete. Inside him, something felt misplaced, like furniture in the wrong house. He had the uneasy sense that he'd been living around his life, not within it, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was waiting to be noticed. Behind his apartment building, half hidden by a crooked fence, there was a small garden. Most people passed it without a glance, assuming it belonged to no one. The gate leaned inward as if tired of holding itself up. Inside, weeds tangled freely around what might once have been flowers. He paused there one evening, struck by a strange sense of recognition. A stone path lay beneath the overgrowth, barely visible but still intact. He nudged a cluster of dry stems aside with his shoe. For a moment, color peeked through, stubborn, faded, but present. It felt like discovering a forgotten photograph in a dusty drawer, proof that something cared for had once lived there. He found himself stepping through the gate without quite deciding to. The air inside felt still, almost patient, as though waiting for footsteps. A brittle leaf crumbled between his fingers when he touched it. Neglect had not destroyed the garden, only hushed it. The realization sat heavily and gently at the same time. In the center stood a small bench, weathered but steady. He brushed off a layer of dust before sitting down. The silence there wasn't empty. It was thick with things unsaid. He exhaled, a long breath he hadn't known he was holding. Somehow, it felt like sitting inside his own chest. As twilight settled, the outlines softened but did not disappear. He noticed how even untended soil held a faint, earthy sweetness. Not gone, just waiting for someone to kneel and begin again. He wondered how long the garden had been calling without words, and why of all evenings he had finally stopped to listen. He returned to the garden the next evening, half expecting it to feel ordinary again. Instead, he found someone already there, kneeling quietly in the soil. An older woman, sleeves rolled, moving with unhurried care. She didn't seem surprised to see him, only nodded as if she had been expecting rain. For a moment, neither of them spoke, which felt strangely comfortable. She was loosening the dirt around a struggling plant with her bare hands, not pulling, not forcing, just making space for the roots to breathe. He watched, unsure why the simple act held his attention. Finally, she smiled gently and said the garden had been thirsty for a long time. Her voice carried the calm of someone who didn't rush even her sentences. He apologized, though he wasn't sure for what. She waved it off with a soft chuckle, as if gardens never held grudges. "Things grow where they're noticed," she said, patting the soil back in place. Then she handed him a small watering can without ceremony. The gesture felt less like a request and more like an invitation. He poured cautiously, worried about doing it wrong. Water darkened the earth, releasing a faint, living scent. The woman watched with quiet approval, not correcting, not praising, just present, as though the moment itself mattered more than the result. He felt an unfamiliar steadiness settle in his chest. When he finally looked up, she was studying the garden, not him. "Serenity isn't something you stumble upon," she murmured. "It grows wherever care returns, even a little at a time." Her words landed softly like seeds rather than instructions, and he sensed she had more to show him if he chose to keep coming back. Many of the stories you hear here aren't just stories. They reflect the invisible weight you may be carrying every day. If you're tired of holding pain, responsibility, and guilt that were never yours, I created an ebook called The weight of stones that are not yours and more too bonus for you. It's for those who want to let go, set boundaries, and live with more lightness. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. The woman began coming every evening, always at the same unhurried hour. She never announced what needed fixing, only started with the smallest task. One day it was clearing a narrow strip of soil, the next just opening the stiff gate. Little by little, she would say, as if speaking to the plants as much as to him. He noticed how nothing in her movements carried urgency or doubt. She showed him how to remove a weed without tearing the roots of what remained. Gentle hands, she reminded, guiding his fingers instead of correcting them. The work felt oddly soothing, like untangling a knot inside his chest. He realized how used he was to forcing things, even within himself. Here, patience seemed to accomplish more than effort ever had. On another evening, she wiped the dust from the bench before sitting. Sunlight slipped through the branches, touching the wood in quiet streaks. Light helps things remember who they are, she said with a faint smile. He didn't fully understand, yet something in him eased at the thought, as if he too had been sitting in shadow longer than he knew. She encouraged him to pause before leaving each night. Just one slow breath, eyes closed, listening to the softened silence. At first he felt silly, standing there with dirt on his hands. Then he noticed how the air seemed calmer when he actually felt it enter his lungs. A minute passed differently when he wasn't trying to outrun it. Serenity isn't found, she told him one dusk as they latched the gate. It's grown through small kindnesses you repeat until they become shelter. Her words lingered as he walked back to his apartment. He caught himself moving more slowly, as though carrying something fragile, and he sensed the garden was beginning to follow him home in invisible ways. He began visiting the garden even on evenings when the woman wasn't there. At first, he felt like a guest in a place that remembered her better than him. So he repeated the small things she had shown him, a little awkwardly, watering one corner, clearing a single stone from the path. It wasn't much, but the soil no longer felt like a stranger to his hands. Some days he arrived carrying the heaviness of sharp words or quiet disappointments. Instead of replaying them, he knelt and pressed his palms into the earth. The coolness steadied him, drawing his attention away from the noise. He found himself breathing the way she had taught him, slow and unforced. By the time he stood again, the sting had softened around the edges. The garden responded in its own quiet language. A few green shoots pushed through where there had been only dust. Color returned cautiously, as if testing whether it was safe to stay. He caught himself smiling at nothing in particular, which startled him. Joy, it seemed, hadn't vanished. It had simply been waiting for room. Inside his apartment, he started creating small pauses too. A minute by the window before turning on the lights. A hand resting over his chest when his thoughts rushed ahead. Sometimes he scribbled a single sentence in a notebook, then closed it. Tiny gestures that felt like watering something no one else could see. He still felt clumsy at times, unsure of what he was becoming, but the old emptiness no longer echoed the same way. It had softened into space, quiet, open, almost welcoming, as if the person he had misplaced was slowly finding the path back, and he wondered how this quiet change might meet the louder parts of life. One afternoon, a sharp remark at work caught him off guard, the kind that once would have replayed in his mind all evening. He felt the familiar heat rise, that urge to defend or withdraw. Instead, he paused, fingertips brushing together as if touching soil. A small breath later, the words seemed less like a wound and more like noise. Later, stuck in traffic beneath a dull gray sky, impatience crept in. Horns blared. Someone shouted from a nearby window. He rested his head back and imagined the garden's narrow path, the quiet crunch of gravel under slow steps, the faint scent of earth. By the time the light changed, his shoulders had lowered on their own. At home, a wave of loneliness arrived without explanation. It used to feel like falling into a room with no doors. Now he lit a small lamp and sat beside it without distraction, just noticing the feeling, the way he had learned to notice the soil. After a minute, it shifted slightly, enough to let warmth in. People began responding to him differently, though no one said why. Conversations softened, tensions eased before they could swell. It was as if his calm created a quieter space around him. Even the hurried barista one morning offered a tired but genuine smile. He carried that moment like a small flower tucked in a pocket. He realized the garden had not stayed behind the crooked fence. It had followed him into crowded rooms and ordinary hours, a steady place inside that he could return to without leaving. and he sensed that tending it might change not only him, perhaps it could gently reshape the world he moved through each day. One evening, as they stood by the gate, the woman handed him a small seed. It was nothing special to look at, just a pale speck resting on his palm. "Most people think care has to be complicated," she said softly, "but a garden grows from moments this small, repeated with kindness." He closed his fingers around it, surprised by how warm it felt. She suggested he choose a quiet minute each day. Not a perfect minute, just one that happened to be empty. Stand still, breathe once as if greeting an old friend. Then ask himself, gently, what is growing inside me today? No fixing, no judging, only noticing what answered back. The next morning, he tried it before leaving his apartment. Shoes on, keys in hand, he paused by the door. A swirl of worry surfaced, along with a flicker of anticipation. He pictured planting the seed in that inner garden. The image stayed with him long after he stepped outside. Some days the practice felt almost too simple to matter. Other days it softened a harsh mood before it could harden. He began to treat that minute as tending a hidden sanctuary, a place no one else could enter or disturb. Strangely, it made the rest of the day feel less crowded. The woman watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. She never asked what he discovered in those pauses, only reminded him that sanctuaries are built from repeated returns. He sensed the exercise was not just preparation but a doorway, leading him toward something he had not yet fully understood. By early spring, the garden no longer looked forgotten. Color leaned gently over the path, and the gate opened without protest. He would sometimes sit on the bench with no task at all, just listening to the quiet hum of a place that had learned to trust again. It felt less like visiting and more like coming home. The woman joined him there one soft afternoon, hands folded in her lap. She nodded toward the flowers, then toward his chest, as if the two were related. "When you care for what's inside," she said, "it begins caring for you back." He understood then that serenity wasn't fragile after all. It was sturdy, like roots holding steady beneath shifting weather. He noticed how the calm stayed with him even on difficult days. Disappointments still arrived, sharp words still landed, but they no longer found empty ground to echo through. They met something tended, something quietly resilient, a refuge he had grown with his own attention. One evening he lingered as the sky dimmed into a gentle blue. The garden breathed around him, alive but unhurried. He realized no one could take this place from him now, because it existed wherever he chose to notice and care. A harmony between inner and outer life, simple and steady. As he closed the gate behind him, he carried the scent of earth on his hands, a reminder that tending never truly ends, nor does it need to. Peace, he had learned, blossoms in the care we give ourselves, quietly, patiently, until it becomes the ground we stand on. And somewhere ahead, another season was already beginning to unfold.